All right, there we go. All right. Walter, are we live?
We are live, Roger.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the HR Roundtable. We are going to wait till we get to about 50 participants before we get started, but welcome everyone. We are just about at 30. We had 83 RSVPs, and I think the our little last minute blast should get us up to a nice healthy 100. All right, let's see who we have here. I can say good morning to. Good morning to Barbara Ross. Morning, David Hanley. Good morning, Doug Arms. Emmy Ruiz. Good morning. Marissa Gomez. Good morning. Nikki Williams. Good morning. Sharon Greenberg. All right. Good morning, everyone. Let's see where we are. So we've got a great presentation for you this morning. Just going to wait for some other folks to filter in, and then we will get started. So this is our sort of first session of the fall season. A little bit of back to school. We're back to school, back to HR school for everyone. So good morning, folks. All right, Candy, good morning. For questions, we're going to be using the Q&A tab for your questions this morning, as opposed to using the regular chat window. So if you do have questions, we'll make sure we do our best to get to all of them. If you could put them into the Q&A window, that would be great. All right, thank you all. All right, good morning, Amy Bletcher. George Triant, good morning. Kara Dukas, good morning. Mighty Matt Abramowitz, good morning, sir. Taronda Miller makes an appearance. Good morning, Taronda. Stephen Lafrano, good morning. All right. Andrea, good morning. What do you say? Should we dive in and get started here? We're expect our count to climb, but I think no reason not to jump right in.
Up to you. We're ready, Roger.
Right. Born ready, born ready. Brenda Franklin, good morning. All right, so let me close this here. And I am going to dive in. Welcome to the HR Roundtable. For those of you who are here for the first time, the HR Roundtable is a monthly seminar series brought to you by the 10 Positions group of companies. My name is Roger Oliver. I am the Director of Strategic Accounts. And just to give you a little background on 10 Positions and who we are a multifaceted staffing solutions firm. We do temporary, temp to hire, and direct hire across a wide range of skill categories. I will just give you a little overview over here. Account positions for accounting and finance. CompuForce for a full range of IT solutions and IT staff. HR staffing solutions, something I think will be near and dear to all of your hearts when you yourselves run out of hands for the task at hand. This is our HR staffing arm. So we provide temporary HR consultants on all levels for all major disciplines of human resources. A lot of things are very calendar driven. So everyone is looking for contract recruiters right now to help out with the staffing effort. But people to come in and do benefits administration during open enrollment and all of those sorts of things. So we've got you covered there. On-call counsel for a full range of legal professionals, so attorneys, paralegals, legal admins, and other skills. We have a very large presence in the education space. School professionals is our division for substitute teachers. We do charter schools and private schools, also teachers' aides, secretaries, and some of these other functions. And we also have the distinction of having the sole provider of pre-K teacher for Mayor de Blasio's signature legislation of universal pre-K. So when all of those community-based organizations that are running pre-K programs funded by the city, when they are not able to find pre-K teachers on their own, which is frankly all the time, that redounds to us. And we are very proud of that. So we are the engine under the hood of the pre-K program and the largest school district in the country. 10 positions, hospitality for waiters, bartenders, culinary professionals, anyone who has that within their purview. Holiday parties will be back at some point, I would imagine. 10 positions, healthcare, very large space for us. We provide direct care workers, RNs, LPNs, a lot of nurse practitioners, and medical assistants being requested these days. We are staffing the Vaccinate New York project for the entire state of New York. All of those large sites that you've seen, the Javits and Yankee Stadium and a lot of those places, those are all of our people. And we also put together a consortium of other staffing firms through the American Staffing Association and the New York chapter of NYSA to build a consortium of staffing professionals, staffing agencies to be able to cover all of the upstate regions, so all the way up to the Canadian border and Albany and all of those areas. 10 positions, logistics, a lot of light industrial out there right now that we are doing, warehouse workers, picker packers, for all those deliveries everyone's getting, be it food or everything else that we're addicted to having sent to our homes. There's a lot of activity in that sector. The genesis of the firm here in just general office support. So administrative assistants, doing a lot of customer service in conjunction with that logistics work. And then just a lot of other things, all the sort of core office support skills. And lastly, the Creative Bureau for graphic artists for design and production, as well as other areas of communications, all of the web designers, web builders, SEO specialists, everything for that sort of outgoing, public-facing part of your organization. So we have got you covered there as well. So I am going to just introduce our folks over here, starting up in what is the left corner of my screen, Brian Bulger of Marsh, who I started the HR Roundtable with, dare I say 21 years ago, Brian? Many years ago.
You have the gray hair to prove it.
Yes, I have the gray hair to prove it. I have my gray hair distinction. And Andrew Singer and Marissa Sandler of Tannenbaum Halpern, who are our speakers this morning. Andrew has done the session for us a great many times. Andrew is the managing partner of Tannenbaum Halpern and chair of the firm's employment law practice, which offers a full spectrum of legal services from everyday counseling to complex employment litigation, with extensive experience in all aspects of employment law. He regularly companies with various HR and compliance issues, including employment, regulation and compliance, HR policies, litigation and dispute resolution, amongst others. He's a frequent speaker on law topics and emerging trends. Andrew regularly conducts training and seminars for supervisory and managerial employees covering equal opportunity laws, sexual harassment, ADA, wage and hour, independent contractor, and other matters. And he has been selected for inclusion in the New York Super Lawyers for looks like every year starting 2010 onto the current, onto the present. And also presenting this morning, Marissa Sandler is associate at Tannenbaum Halpern's employment practice, and she represents employers and executive employees in employment matters ranging from litigation to counseling and compliance, and represents clients across all industries with a focus on healthcare staffing industries, and then other areas such as employment litigation, HR counseling and compliance, HR policies and employment agreements. And she has also done an extensive amount of pro bono work, which is which is terrific as well. So with that, I'm going to leave you in the very capable hands of Andrew Singer and Marissa Sandler. Thank you much.
Thank you, Roger. It's certainly much better to be doing this in person, so I miss that, as I think most people do. Thank you, Roger and Brian, for having us. I've probably presented as far back as 12, 13, 14 years ago, I would imagine, something like that. Could be longer. And always appreciate the opportunity to address any of the hot topics that companies and employers face. And I want to thank Marissa Sandler, my colleague, who did an outstanding job with assisting with putting together this program, and looking forward to her participation along with me. So thank you, Marissa, for that. A couple of things just to start out with. One, as you know, Roger so ably described, and as you can imagine, we have been very busy since March of 2020, fielding phone calls pretty regularly, having to do with COVID, right? There was all sorts of new laws that went into place, went into effect, laws that greatly impacted the workplace, that were a challenge to figure out, and that continues. We'll talk about the New York State HEROES Act a little bit later. That is new and recently went into effect based on our governor's proclamation in September and October. We'll talk about that as well. You know, the biggest issue that we've been seeing is obviously, and it's in the title, is vaccination, right? Companies have started to come back in some way, shape, or form, probably as early as the summer of 2020. Some never went away, but for those that did go fully remote, that were not essential, it's been going on for a while now. And now we're seeing a new landscape with vaccination mandates, and we're going to help describe to you what the law is with respect to vaccinations in the workplace, but also talk about the practicalities. As you know, as HR professionals, it's very critical that you understand the law, but that's not the end of it. It's applying the law to human beings that is always a challenge. As far back as, I began practicing over 25 years ago. There's just like hundreds of more laws and regulations that we have to deal with today than when I started. That's kind of an introduction to what we're going to try to talk about today and do. What I do want to say is, while it is inevitable when you talk about vaccination-related laws in the employer-employee context, their politics is part of this, not part of the subject matter, having nothing to do with what we're going to present to you. We're not taking sides. We don't judge. It's irrelevant to us as lawyers. However, you do have to consider, to a certain extent, the politics in your geographic location, trying to predict what may or may not happen with laws going forward. So who's in office, who's not in office, who may be in office, that is relevant. And so we'll try to give you some of our thoughts about that along the way, but it's not from a political perspective, it's from a predictive perspective. So I just want to make that clear. So let's get started. So Joe Biden, our president, has came out with a six-pronged approach called the path out of the pandemic. And it is a big deal. And obviously the headlines, were very large and very impactful. Employers with 100 or more employees must mandate vaccination of their employees. Federal workers and federal contractors, regardless of size, and healthcare workers at Medicare and Medicaid facilities. Marissa's going to talk a little bit more about it, but it all isn't in place now, particularly the 100 or more employee requirement. And that's going to be implemented through a new standard with OSHA, and that takes time. So this isn't all immediate, nor do we know if it'll ever be in effect, because there will be legal challenges. I heard this morning on the news that Texas has, and I don't remember whether the governor signed an executive order or in what context, but he's prohibited employer vaccination mandates. So there's obviously going to be legal challenges. I think it's clear what the federal government and the White House is trying to do is to use whatever influence they can to have employers mandate vaccination to aid in its goal of having more of our citizens vaccinated. But there's a lot that needs to happen before it all comes into effect. So I'm going to now lean on Marissa to go into the details here.
Thanks, Andrew. So these are the vaccine mandates that are part of Biden's plan. As Andrew mentioned, it's employers with over 100 employees, federal contractors, and healthcare workers providing services at Medicare and Medicaid facilities. With respect to employers with 100 or more employees, that mandate is going to come through an OSHA emergency temporary standard. There's no OSHA rule yet, so it's technically not effective. It's unclear whether OSHA has actually the capacity and the legal authority to implement the standard. And as Andrew mentioned before, a lot of these mandates are likely going to come with some litigation and legal challenge. What we do know about it is that employers with 100 or more employees are going to be required per the OSHA standard to be fully vaccinated, or employees that are unvaccinated need to submit to weekly testing and must show a negative result before coming to the workplace. With respect to federal contractors, this is part of an executive order that Biden signs. On its face, it's very broad. It applies to any person performing work in connection with a government contract. It requires that federal contract employees be fully vaccinated by December 8th or the first day of performance on a contract option or extended or renewed contract. What we do know about this is that there's going to be accommodations for religion and disability, and we're going to discuss the accommodations a little bit later in the program. Healthcare workers at Medicare and Medicaid facilities. This mandate is being implemented through a Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services rule. It's expected to be issued this month. It's only going to apply to certain Medicare and Medicaid facilities. That's your hospitals, dialysis facilities, ambulatory surgical settings, and home health agencies. Then I think Andrew's going to talk a little bit about the New York State healthcare mandate.
Right. So that kind of takes care of that the Biden announcement and what they're trying to do on the federal level in getting more people vaccinated through the employer-employee relationship. New York State is also doing everything they can to vaccinate as many individuals as possible. And in August, the New York State Department of Health issued a new regulation mandating vaccination for certain healthcare workers. It required personnel working at general hospitals and nursing homes to receive their first dose by September 27th. And then other personnel working at other covered entities, such as home care, hospice, and adult care facilities, had to receive their first dose by October 7th. So this is very recent, these deadlines. And in the news, we heard a tremendous fear over large staffing shortages if this mandate was going to be followed. As it turned out, we know that there were thousands of healthcare workers that did end up getting their vaccination. So it is working. An important aspect of this, that the mandate did not permit religious exemptions, and we're going to talk about the law generally with respect to vaccination mandates in that regard. But with respect to this healthcare mandate in New York State, it did not. And on September 14th, a federal judge temporarily blocked enforcement of this mandate for those claiming religious exemptions. However, they argued. Sorry, take a step back. So they argued that it violated their sincerely held religious beliefs, which is, again, another topic we'll be talking later, which is part of the general federal law that they were arguing. The TRO is only in effect until today, and then we'll see what the judge rules on a more permanent basis. It's what's called a motion for a preliminary injunction. So we'll see what the court does. Marissa,
Andrew,
we haven't heard anything yet, Marissa, on that decision?
Right. So the TRO is being issued today. Is being enjoined until today. The judge is going to issue a preliminary injunction. That's up for debate today when the TRO expires. An important point on this is that the reason that the healthcare workers were challenging it, yes, is because of religious exemptions. They're saying that the COVID vaccines employ aborted fetal cells in the testing, development, and production of the vaccine. So that's why they're saying it violates their sincerely held religious beliefs. It was a bunch of Catholics and Baptists. The state has responded to that. They said, while the vaccines may have used it in their production, development, and testing, none of the vaccines actually use and employ the fetal cells. And I'll also add to that I'll also add to that sorry, I lost my train of thought. The state has said that there's a bunch of other vaccinations that don't have religious exemptions. So it's actually consistent with some of the regulations that are already requiring vaccines already. So it's nothing new to have a healthcare vaccine mandate that doesn't allow for religious exemptions.
Thanks, Marissa. Roger, did you?
Yeah, I had just a couple of questions that came through. For those with questions, please put them in the Q&A tab. Greatly appreciated. But about the 100 employees matter, Felicia asked, what is the recommendation for employers with under 100 employees? And another anonymous attendee asked, if under 100, but receiving federal state assistance on some programs, do we have to abide by the federal contractor guidelines for vaccination? So first question, what's the recommendation for employers with under 100 employees? And then if under 100, but receiving federal assistance on some programs, do we have to abide by the federal contractor guidelines for vaccination?
Marissa, you want to take the second and I'll take the first after?
Sure.
Go ahead. Why don't you answer the second one, Marissa?
Sure. So on its face, with respect to the federal contractor one, it's anyone that's currently working in connection with a federal contract. So I don't know if you're just receiving federal funds, whether you would be required to abide by that vaccination mandate. It's with respect to federal contracts.
Yeah, the way there's the reading of it, I don't think it would, but that doesn't mean that the federal government wouldn't take a position opposite to that. We just haven't had the opportunity to look into that issue. It's a very good question, though. Recommendations for under 100. So from a legal perspective as lawyers, we're not recommending that employers mandate vaccination or that you shouldn't mandate vaccination. That's the decision of the company, of the employer. There isn't under the law one way that's better or not. As long as you are complying with all state and federal guidelines, the CDC and New York State guidelines for office use, for example, that's all you need to do. So that's on the legal side. I think on the, and this is what I meant, a very large aspect of the decision on whether to mandate vaccines in the workplace is your culture, your work environment. And the smaller the company, oftentimes it's the owner's belief that is what governs. But really, it's if you have a workplace where only 50% of your workforce is vaccinated, and because of a labor shortage, it would be very difficult if there was meaningful turnover. Even if you wanted to mandate vaccine, as a business, you might not be able to for worrying that you'll have tremendous turnover and you'll lose 25, 30, 35% of your workforce. On the other hand, if your workforce is 97% vaccinated, there may be a benefit to just say, hey, let's make it 100. We can now say we're 100% vaccinated, and that might be a benefit from a marketing standpoint, your clients, whatever business you're in. So, and those are just a couple of examples. You really need to look at it from the non-legal side as well to determine whether or not, as an employer, you believe that you should mandate vaccines. We don't, as lawyers, have a legal opinion as to which way is better or not. Hopefully that answers the question. We good, Roger?
Yes, I believe so. We do have another question here from Raymond Kushmore. Should we include volunteers with employees when determining if we meet the 100 employee rule?
So that's actually.
Go ahead, Marissa.
That's unclear because, it is being implemented through an OSHA standard. So it's actually unclear who's going to be counted towards the 100 employee threshold count. It could be also that independent contractors are counted. So
so for those employers that are not currently mandating vaccines and you're over 100 employees, this announcement of a potential future requirement, that would not be the reason I would do it if it were up to me. This historically, there's been legal challenges that have been upheld. The authority of OSHA to do this is in question. There will be legal challenges. OSHA typically doesn't act very quickly. So this I think is more political in, Biden indicating and probably it wouldn't surprise me if he did not have conversations with many large business CEOs who said, hey, it's going to be hard for me to mandate, but if you can do something that we can say, hey, the federal government is going to require this, we'll mandate it. And so I think there was some back-channeled business discussion with the federal government. So I think you would, in order to decide whether or not to mandate vaccines as a large employer, really, from a legal standpoint, I wouldn't put much emphasis on, unless you want to use it as cover, which is you can, many companies have, because we still don't know what that standard is going to look like, how quickly it's going to happen, the legal challenges, and it actually may never come into effect. And it's not like a 2% chance that would happen. It's a meaningful percentage chance that this will never happen, just knowing how the process works. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I'll also add to that, a lot of these vaccine mandates that are coming through the federal government has acted as the employer. So it's a little bit more difficult for the federal government to impose something on private employers, which will likely be the subject to some legal debate.
Thanks, Marissa. So why don't you now take over and let's move from the state mandates to New York City mandates.
Thanks. So there are New York City mandates. These are just a couple. As you know, there's indoor dining. It's very broad. It covers restaurants, catering halls, bars, nightclubs, cafeterias, etc. Indoor fitness, gyms, fitness centers, fitness classes, pools, fitness studios, indoor entertainment and certain meeting spaces. Meeting spaces are also very broad. You have hotel meeting and event spaces, game centers, the list goes on. And then what's garnered a lot of attention in the news recently is the public school teachers and other staff vaccine mandate. According to that mandate, employees had to be vaccinated or receive their first dose by September 27th. There were several legal challenges to that, but perhaps most recently, the Supreme Court denied an appeal to block the mandate. So like the New York State healthcare mandate, it ended up that a lot of teachers in the final leg got vaccinated.
All right. So now we kind of zoned in New York State, federal New York State, and New York City, and some of the mandates. Now let's talk about the general law of the land when it comes to mandatory vaccinations. This is not new. Okay, this was in place before there was even a vaccine for COVID. So the answer is yes, employers can mandate vaccinations for all employees, period. You can do it with or without a mandate. However, there are some legal issues that you must know, in that there are a couple of different types of exemptions that employees might raise to say that they will not get vaccinated. One is, as we alluded to earlier, there's a religious exemption under Title VII. And then there are also medical exemptions that are possible under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Again, though, remember, if you're deciding on whether to mandate vaccinations, you must focus on the non-legal issues as well. And I touched on them earlier. What is the culture? What percentage of your population is vaccinated? So we have many clients who, when making that decision, conducted a survey on who was vaccinated and who was not vaccinated. That helps make the determination. What's your labor market like in your industry? Is it easy to find employees to replace those that may leave if they refuse to be vaccinated? Are you going to terminate people who don't get vaccinated? Are you really going to enforce it, even if it's a critical employee? And we had a few of our clients who said, yes, we want to mandate vaccination. And then when they thought about it, like, well, what happens if these 6 or 7 key employees are not vaccinated? I can't fire them. They're too important to the business, or they generate too much revenue. What do you do then? And as we know in the HR world, while it is not unlawful or illegal to treat different employees differently, so long as you have a legitimate business reason, once you start doing that, even unintentionally, you may accidentally discriminate and provide evidence for that. So just be careful of that. But those are all real considerations that are very important. So let's get a little bit specific. So again, Title VII is where this religious exemption comes from. The key, and we have it in bold so that you know it's key without me saying it, is it has to be a sincerely held religious belief, right? Not necessarily so easy to determine, right? The EEOC has defined a religious belief as moral or ethical beliefs as to what is right and wrong, which are sincerely held with the strength of traditional religious views, right? So it isn't something that someone just came up with. Hey, it's against my religion. You know, it has to be real, sincerely held. And so a lot of the requests for exemptions for religious beliefs is related to what Marissa described earlier, when what we saw is the healthcare workers with respect to fetal tissue. So interesting, there was a hospital, it was one of the southern states, and I apologize, Alabama is sticking out in my mind, but I'm not 100% certain. And so they had they were mandating vaccines, and they had a number of employees that were arguing that it was against their religion and therefore they should be exempt. And so what the hospital did, not necessarily recommending this, but I thought it was interesting and good to know. They had a form, and the form that every employee requesting that exemption had to sign. And it started, and those exemption requests were all based on this same fetal tissue used in the development of the vaccine, same argument. And so it described that you were affirming that was the basis of your objection to getting vaccinated. It then said that the use of fetal tissue in the development of all kinds of over-the-counter medications is common. And they listed about 30 different commonly used medications that also use fetal tissue in its development and production, such as ibuprofen and all sorts of things. And I recognized at least 7 or 8 of the 30. And it said that you affirm that you do not use any of these for the same reason. And then it had some more acknowledgments and affirmations at the bottom. So interesting that they went to that length in order, and I'm imagining their lawyer said that's one way you can determine or help determine whether or not the belief was sincerely held if they're prepared to sign that and they acknowledge not using these other medications, because that shows that it's a sincere belief. So that I found that just to be fascinating, and I learned I didn't realize that all those medications also use fetal tissue. So how do you determine as an employer whether a religious exemption is sincerely held? You should evaluate whether the employee has behaved in a manner inconsistent with their professed belief, right? Over time, in conversations or in their behavior, is it consistent with your understanding of this belief from a religious perspective? So the more observant someone might be, that might be evidence of a sincerely held belief. Not determinative, because someone may be very private with their religious beliefs, but certainly evidence that can be used. The timing of the request, right? Did they make a request for non-religious purposes, and then all of a sudden you rejected it, so now they said, well, I'm also objecting based on my religion? That certainly calls into question the sincerity of that belief, and any other circumstances which causes you to believe that accommodation is not being sought for religious reasons. And this is the same issue as making workplace accommodations unrelated to the vaccine, right? Similar issue here is be careful. It's not, this belief does not have to be in one of the most common religions, right, that we've all heard of or that the majority of people belong to, right? It can be from a new religion or a religion that very few people belong to. You know,
we've got some questions on this, Andrew. So
sure, go ahead. Go ahead. It's a good time
right.
for that.
We'll see. Maybe some of them might have been partly covered. So Nakia Burke asking, if you were granted a medical exception and it is not honored or accepted by the organization, if you take a chance with your health and take it, does that eliminate your ability to claim medical exception, especially with boosters? It seems once you comply, despite your religious and medical objections, you will be trapped in a perpetual cycle of denouncing your beliefs.
Well, I think that goes to like the sincerity. If someone truly believes it is against their religion, they're not going to get vaccinated, theoretically at first. Mm-hmm. If the person does get vaccinated, I don't know that because it is denied, that employee still could have a claim that you violated their rights under Title VII. So that doesn't, simply because the employer did not grant them their exemption and then they were forced in order to keep their job, they still might have a claim. I don't know if that's the question, but
I think the next question was probably answered by already. I think in your last bit of commentary there, David Hanley asking for religious exemption. What would be necessary to qualify? Does religion have to be nationally recognized, or does the employee have to present something that states that, or does the employee have to simply take their word for it? I think
not neither, right? I mean, it does not have to be a nationally recognized religion. I don't know, for those of you who may have watched, I actually recently watched, I forgot what network it was on. It was a documentary on the Remnant Church, which is it's portrayed as a cult, but it is people that have real religious beliefs. There's only a couple of thousand members in the country. If someone truly believes, as part of being in that religion, that you'd have to grant them the exemption, right? It does not have to be nationally recognized. But you do not have to simply take the word of the employee. So we're talking about what the employer can do. And actually, the next slide that Marissa put up, we're going to go further into what type of evidence can an employer get in determining the sincerity. So we can go to that slide, Roger, unless there's
a few more.
Sure.
Yeah. Just want to try and get to folks. George Triant asking, when the federal, New York State, and New York City mandates take effect, will they be enforced? What are the penalties for noncompliance?
So the New York State and New York City mandates are currently in effect. It's part of Biden's action plan that was being implemented through executive orders and rules from governmental agencies. That is, at least the rules that are coming through governmental agencies are not currently in effect.
All right, Marissa Gomes asks, can employers mandate vaccines for some locations but not all? For instance, require vaccines for New York City office but not an office somewhere else in the country?
Well, not only can you, but the laws might be different in the different locality on whether you can mandate even. I mentioned Texas earlier. Now, the governor has signed, I believe it was an executive order. I mean, it's possible that it was law, but that employers cannot mandate vaccination. So if you had an office in New York City and in Texas, you have conflicting laws. So the answer is yes, you can. And I'm just wearing my pure legal employment lawyer hat right now in stating this. Obviously, if you treat different people differently and you have white collar workers in one location and let's say warehouse workers who are primarily in protected classes, that could be an issue that someone might raise by treating different people differently. So you always have to look at that. But the answer is yes. There is not a law that prohibits you from having different vaccine mandates in different locations.
So we have a comment here, I guess with a question also from someone in the group here saying, I have a medical exemption because of a history of anaphylaxis, as well as having a religious belief, but I assumed the medical would be stronger, so I applied for the medical, which was still not honored.
Right. So one thing I wanted to emphasize is that with respect to a sincerely held religious belief or a medical exemption, that's not the end of the inquiry. An employer has to be able to make an accommodation that's not going to cause an undue hardship on their business. And employees who are unvaccinated, there's this argument that they pose a direct threat to the workplace. So just because you make a request for an accommodation, an employer still needs to engage in what's called an interactive process with the employee to determine, whether an accommodation could be made absent undue hardship.
Okay. Someone asked, can we get that list of commonly used medications that were developed using fetal tissue? If you have it,
I actually didn't keep it, but I'm guessing if you Google and it's a hospital, and it was in the South. If I had it, I would be happy to email it. I read it one day, and I should have, kept a copy of it. I just didn't. And again, as I said, for whatever reason, Alabama is sticking in my head.
All right. From Stephen Lafrano, if COVID testing is implemented as an alternative to vaccination, do employers need to take the religious and medical exemptions into consideration because another option has been provided to that employee?
So the accommodation in that is, they would still have to take it into consideration, but the accommodation in that instance could be the weekly testing. So that's the alternative. That's how they'll accommodate someone who's unvaccinated.
And follow up, have there been cases of religious or medical exemptions against frequent COVID testing?
Say that one more time, Roger.
Have there been cases of religious or medical exemptions against frequent COVID testing. If someone made a claim, religious or medical claim against the practice of frequent COVID
Being
testing.
tested.
Are you
I
familiar with
haven't.
any?
I have not read nor heard of that at all, nor do I think it would have any merit.
Yeah.
It has to prevent the religion or the disability has to conflict with like a work requirement. That's why the vaccine with, the fetal tissue cells, it's that the two conflict. So I don't know what disability or religion you would allege that would conflict with testing.
We're right. So, and we haven't heard of it. So, I mean, theoretically, as an employment lawyer and in HR, people can come up with anything. I just have not heard of that. I don't think anyone in our group has at all.
All right. Walter, do you want to throw the poll up there?
Yeah, let's ask those two questions now, just out of curiosity, I think. I find it discriminatory, Roger, that I can't vote.
Do you have the biggest microphone, Andrews?
What I can say is our law firm does mandate vaccination for a variety of reasons. But one of the things that we did was we did conduct a survey, and what made it easier for us from a legal standpoint and from a business standpoint is that I think when we first did the survey, we were over 90% vaccinated. So it wasn't difficult to get to 100%.
All right, with that, so.
Yeah, and so that's interesting. That's relatively consistent with what I have seen with our clients. I don't know, Marissa, if, what your perspective is, but that seems the percentages look about right to where we are today.
Yeah.
Although I think many of the employers that have not yet mandated it are considering it. I think many businesses are considering it now, and over the next month or two, I think you'll see a lot more do it.
Yeah, it's also not all or nothing. It's not like it's either you have to require vaccination or you don't say anything. You could still strongly encourage or just encourage your employees to get vaccinated also.
Right.
Okay. Here's poll question number 2. When do you plan to return to the office? See, what's your guess on this, Marissa? What do you think the stats are going to show?
I think it depends on industry. I'm gonna
That's
guess.
such a lawyerly answer, Marissa.
Well, you have healthcare workers, besides from the telemedicine services, they're in office. They haven't left. Some work environments are remote. I'll go with hybrid. That's going to be my guess.
Yeah,
That's what I think.
I'm going to go with hybrid. But as Andy says, the lawyerly answer is it depends. As always, there we go.
Yeah.
Survey says hybrid. There we go.
Yeah.
Not a surprise there.
Not a surprise.
Dive back in.
So let's dive right back in. We're back into the religious exemption and what you can do as an employer to try to determine whether an employee's religious exemption claim is based on a sincerely held belief. So some of the things, you can interview them, whatever they say. You can get affidavits or other documents from third parties, including religious leaders or others who may have observed the employee's past adherence to a specific religion. and other people who follow the same religion or belief, that those are in play, and the employee's own statements and explanations as to follow-up questions. So it's not, it's not one question, this is your belief, yes, you can, ask. If it's a particular religion, particularly something that you're familiar with, religions have many rules. You can, ask, do you follow all rules? Some of the rules, is this the only one that you follow? You're allowed to cross-examine a little bit. You do want to be careful, because the more aggressive you are, even if what you're asking or what you're conducting is appropriate, it might be viewed as not a level playing field, and often the employer is viewed, because employment is at stake, that you forced an employee to back off their belief because you were very aggressive. So you need to be careful. In these kind of conversations, I typically like to have two people in the room so that there's a second person who will concur as to what was said or not said. So I think that's helpful. And then here's just a little simple roadmap on the process. My own advice, take the request seriously. Start from a premise that the request and the belief is sincere, kind of like innocent until proven guilty, which oftentimes we have trouble with nowadays in some respects. In the employer-employee relationship, that's important, I think. I think that should cover religious exemptions, Marissa. Is that correct? Yes. So why don't we, I think we've spent a good amount of time on the religious exemptions. Let's jump into the medical exemptions, Marissa.
Sure. So obviously you also need to consider the need for medical exemptions. The American with Disabilities Act requires covered employers, and that's your employers with 15 or more employees, to reasonably accommodate qualified individuals with a disability that prevents them from taking the vaccine. Again, that's the work conflict, unless doing so would cause undue hardship. Upon receipt of an accommodation request, you can request sufficient documentation, like with religious exemptions, but you could only request documentation if the disability or the need for the accommodation isn't obvious. You can't ask for a medical documentation if it is obvious, or if you're already on notice that the person has a disability. And then we have listed here some appropriate and inappropriate documentation that you can request. I think the important point here is just that, we're requesting documentation to substantiate the disability. If something's unrelated, like for example, if we're asking for complete medical records, that would not be an acceptable request for documentation. I also just want to add, if you do collect the documentation, it has to be kept confidential, and it should be kept separate from an employee's personnel file. So similar to religious exemptions, you should identify the vaccination-related impairment, the disability, request documentation only if it's not obvious, engage in an interactive process with the employee. That's discussing the limitations of the employee's medical, or in the case of religious exemptions, religion, that prevents them from taking the vaccine, and determine whether you can provide an accommodation that won't cause undue hardship. Again, that may be testing. An accommodation may be testing. It may be if someone could perform work functions remotely. That may be an accommodation. If you're outside New York, an accommodation may be wearing masks. We'll talk about why vaccination is important in New York in a second. So there's other accommodations that can be made. And then we've touched on these already. These are the non-legal considerations, the percentage of the workforce that's already vaccinated, whether employees are largely remote. We have one client that was thinking about instituting a mandatory vaccination policy, but their employees are largely remote. So you may not have, the same reason to impose a vaccine mandate if people aren't coming to the office every single day. A lot of the main reason, that these vaccine mandates are lawful is because employers have an obligation to provide a healthy and safe workplace. So if that workplace is remote, there's different considerations there. Turnover in an increasingly tight labor market. We've touched on employee morale and pushback again. If they're your very important employees that are unvaccinated, that may hold different weight. And then there's overhead, with collecting vaccination information and handling accommodation requests to the extent that you're going to mandate vaccines. Before we go on to the next topic, are there any questions regarding medical exemptions? Do we have any? No, okay.
Okay, so we'll move on. The New York State HERO Act. I'm sure everyone is fully familiar and has fully complied with this act. It was passed a few months ago, and it really, at first, those that heard of it were focused on it, but the reality was it really was set up for future illnesses and pandemics. It was not meant for COVID as it currently stood. What it does is it amends the New York labor law to impose obligations on employers with respect to health and safety standards for airborne infectious diseases. And there are certain requirements. By August 5th, every employer had to have an airborne infectious disease exposure prevention plan. September 4th, a copy of that plan in English and in an employee's primary language was to be distributed. November 1st, coming up, employers with at least 10 employees they are permitted, employees are to form a workplace safety committee. That being said, our governor I believe it was on Labor Day, Marissa, if I'm correct, yeah. Issued a proclamation that COVID, and I actually don't remember, was it the Delta variant specifically or just COVID-19 in general, right? COVID-19 in general. It now qualified as an infectious disease under the HEROES Act. So, and it was that proclamation was only through September. However, that has been extended through October. And it is unclear, what the governor is going to do. So it is now in play, and I'll turn the program over to Marissa to get into a little bit more specificity.
Sure. So the designation was important because what that means is that employers actually have to implement their plan. As Andrew mentioned, before, the whole point of the HERO Act was that, New York felt that we were unprepared for this type of pandemic. So they wanted to have employers have a plan in place in case it happened again in the future. But with COVID now being designated, there's now obligations on employers. You have to implement the plan. You have to verbally review the plan with your employees. And as to the plan in particular, the New York State Department of Labor has issued some model plans, and they've also issued some industry specific plans. But the main plan components are health screening, face covering, PPE, physical distancing, hand hygiene, cleaning, and disinfection. For New York employer, again, this only applies to New York employers. For New York employers, this sounds familiar because it was similar to the New York Forward guidance that was issued at when we were reopening offices.
Marissa, a few questions.
Sure.
One is, are there examples of prevention plans available online to adopt for the HERO Act? And secondly, what are the obligations of an employer to keep medical records, weekly testing, vaccination records, for example, on file for temporary employees? Is this the responsibility of the hired agency? What is the what is recommended to safeguard the organization utilizing temp help in compliance? That's interesting. Andrew, do you want to take that, perhaps?
No, I'm going to let Marissa.
Okay.
So just remind me what the first question was. Are there model plans? That was the first
yeah,
question.
are there model plans available to adopt?
Yes. So there are model plans. The New York State Department of Labor has put it on their website. If you just Google HERO Act, you'll see a model plan. My memory is that it's been translated in Spanish. There's also industry specific plans. Like I recall off the top of my head, for example, there's one for construction. And we're generally recommending that employers use the model plan because if you don't, it could be construed as an alternative plan. And if it's an alternative plan, you're actually supposed to have meaningful employee participation from your employees with respect to the plan. So the simpler course is to just use the model plan. That's not saying you can't like tweak the exposure controls to make it conform to your particular office. We just recommend using the templates. And then with respect, the second question, correct me if I'm wrong, was what were our obligations as a temporary staffing firm to maintain medical records with respect to vaccination?
It's what are the obligations of an employer to keep medical records, weekly testing, vaccination records on file for temporary employees? Or is it the responsibility of the staffing agency themselves? What is the recommended safeguard to safeguard the organization utilizing temporary help in compliance?
Sure.
I wish our COO was still on the call. He may have a better answer, at least from our standpoint. I'm unsure, but I will certainly look from the staffing solutions firm side of things to see what I understand to be and what, if any, obligations we have for holding and immortalizing that that information.
Yeah, so normally, the obligations with respect to health and safety is normally in the agreement between the staffing firm and the client. But that's not to say that neither should kind of dig their heads in the sand. You should jointly work together with respect to health and safety issues, which includes, vaccinating employees. Normally, the temporary staffing firm is the employer in that instance, so they have more of a reason. I mean, of course, there's joint employment issues there as well. But again, if we're collecting proof of vaccination, we should be keeping those records separate from any personnel file. I hope that answered the question.
All right, we can go ahead and move forward. Question so far.
So we kind of hinted at this before. Why does vaccination matter? New York State has come out and said that if you have all individuals in your workplace, and all individuals doesn't just include employees, that includes anyone who visits your workplace, or any contractors, then if they're all vaccinated, then you don't have to wear face coverings at work. If any single one person comes to your workplace and they are unvaccinated, everyone has to wear masks. That's what New York has come out and said. So that's why, these vaccination policies do matter.
Right. And so remember, I talked about my firm, but theoretically, an employer might have 5 or 6 employees on 5 or 6 different floors, and you have one person on one floor. It doesn't matter. You can't say, well, the people on the other floors have zero. They're not ever going to come into contact with that unvaccinated person. It doesn't matter. And so I think what happens from time to time is you have a health-related, politically driven decision that was done quickly without real thought as to all of the different types of employers, types of locations, and you can make this completely safe and practical so that it works. That was not done here, obviously. But the law is the law. It is clear. And there's no ambiguity.
Oh, you know what? Let me just go back for a second. One thing I also just want to add is that the plan only applies to work sites that we have the ability to control. So it wouldn't apply to a telecommuting site. We're not required to have a plan for someone's remote home office. We're also required to post a plan at each work site and in our handbook to the extent we have one. There's also rights for employees under the HERO Act, and a retaliation claim. There's actually big damages there. So compliance with this is very important.
Yeah, and I'm going to double down on that statement. I think in today's world that it is very conceivable that if an employer is not complying with the HEROES Act, that there will be employees who figure out what rights they have. There will be lawyers who will find employees, and there are real economic ramifications. So this is not something that you should not take seriously. For me, this is a real issue. And as I said, even at our own firm, despite the impracticality of it and how safe we can be and control who has contact with someone who may come to the office as unvaccinated, we are fully compliant, and we're not permitting unvaccinated individuals into our space for the moment. So please take that seriously. If anyone has any questions, let us know. The other thing I want to say, if someone has can't locate the state template, just shoot us an email, and we'll email you the template, or at least email you the hyperlink to the website, and help you out that way. So don't hesitate to reach out if you have issues locating it.
It's also the website, that area is being frequently updated. So just check that. There's FAQs on there as well.
Yeah, and these things change, by the way. We regularly try to look at, because answers to the FAQs change. And for all I know, someone's going to wake up soon and say, hey, wait a minute. If you're on different floors in New York City, maybe they'll, make an exception or make some statement about if you're just obligated to control who that person comes into contact with. So, and they don't make some big proclamation, that's in the news. It'll just be suddenly on the website, you'll look the next day and it changes. So, keep an eye on that as well. It's something good to regularly go back to. So we thought it would be a decent idea to kind of talk about some of the other COVID-related laws and leave and benefit laws that came into play. A couple of them, if you remember, not even still in effect, but who wants to forget the Families First Coronavirus Response Act that came into play. And we were basically on the phone all day, every day for weeks when this was first passed with our clients. No longer in effect now, but just felt like the program wouldn't be complete without a reminder as to what life was like in 2020. Marissa, why don't you talk a little bit about some of these other leaves and benefits?
Yeah, so we'll talk about some federal, New York State, and New York City. The Family and Medical Leave Act, that's one that employers typically know. It applies to employers with at least 50 employees within a 75-mile radius. Employees can receive unpaid leave under the FMLA to care for themselves if they have a serious health condition, to care for the employee, spouse, or child or parent with a serious health condition. COVID-related, it must qualify as a serious health condition. So if you have someone, for example, who's asymptomatic, I would have doubts that would qualify as a serious health condition, entitling them to leave under the FMLA. New York State has also implemented its own COVID-related leave. Sometimes it's referred to as New York State quarantine leave or New York State COVID paid sick leave. It's a leave that applies when employees are subject to an order of quarantine or isolation issued by New York State, local health department, or some other authorized governmental authority. The amount of leave and benefits depend on your size and your net income, and those are listed there. New York State has issued guidance, I think, back in January about when COVID leave is available. It's only available for the duration of an order of quarantine or isolation. So depending on your size, you can provide 5 or 14 days of paid COVID leave. Those days are calendar days, and they're only available when for the duration of the order of isolation. So if there is a quarantine order, we've been seeing some quarantine orders for 10 days as opposed to 14 days, which is what it was and at the start of the pandemic. If you have a 10-day quarantine order, that's calendar days, and it's only the days the employee would have been regularly scheduled to work. Once they're no longer subject to the order, there's no more benefits. Employers cannot require employees to exhaust other sick leave. So in New York, there's New York State and New York City sick leave. This New York State quarantine leave is in addition to any other leave. You can also qualify for COVID leave for more than 2 orders of quarantine or isolation, and the second or third orders must be based on a positive test. So recently, for example, I had a question from a client. They tested positive, the employee tested positive, and then the employee's family member tested positive. That's not going to entitle the employee to a second COVID quarantine leave, because of that has to depend on a positive test.
Face mask question. If all employees, interns, contractors are vaccinated, but occasional clients are coming in and are required to wear masks, is that okay?
No, unless
right. It's no, right. So that's if they're all vaccinated and you're requiring people to wear a mask, then the answer is that is okay. But if one person is unvaccinated, then everyone's got to wear a mask.
There you go. And another here from Terry Thomas. Yeah. where can we find guidance on paid leave for multi-state employers?
Yeah, I'm not aware of just one single source. I think what I would do is I would first look to the Department of Labor website, or whatever the state COVID website would be, and that's where I would go. Typically at this juncture, every state has that information on their website, and if you Google the state and COVID leave laws or anything like that, you should be directed pretty quickly to the appropriate resource.
There's also New York State vaccination leave. New York State vaccination leave is only in effect through the end of next year. It provides employees up to 4 hours per vaccine injection. So obviously, you know, the amount of time that employee is going to be eligible to receive will depend on which vaccine the employee is receiving. If they're receiving the Johnson & Johnson single dose vaccine, they're eligible for up to 4 hours of leave for that vaccine. If they're receiving Moderna or Pfizer, which is a 2-dose vaccine, they're entitled to up to 8 hours of leave for that vaccine, for that series of vaccines. And it's also possible, and there hasn't been guidance on this yet, to my knowledge, that we also could be required to provide leave for a booster shot, because it's 4 hours per vaccine injection. That doesn't mean that an employee is automatically entitled to 4 hours. It depends on the need and the circumstances of the employee. If they can go get a vaccine within an hour, they're entitled to 1 hour of leave. It's up to 4 hours. Vaccination leave is also only available for the employee's own vaccination. You can't take vaccination leave to assist someone else in getting a vaccine. Employers can require advance notice of the need to take vaccination leave and request proof of vaccination. But as we mentioned earlier, vaccination status must be kept confidential. Like the other leaves available, this is on top of other New York State and New York City leave. So you can't have employees use this leave instead of New York State paid sick leave. It's a separate leave entitlement. And then there's discrimination and retaliation protections under this law.
Here's one. I don't know if you sort of might have answered this just now in your comments there. If your headquarters require leave and another state does not, do you need to offer the leave established in the headquartered state? Example, headquarters New York, employee in Georgia.
Typically, the law of the physical location of the employee is what governs. That doesn't mean that the employer can provide greater benefits to employees in other locations, but it would be New York State law, employment-related law wouldn't govern someone working in Georgia under any of these kind of laws. I mean, sometimes by contract you can alter the law of the relationship.
New York State and New York City paid sick leave as well. This is in addition to the COVID or quarantine leave and to the vaccination leave. New York State and New York City have similar leave obligations. Employees or a family member could take leave if they have an illness or health condition. So for example, employee has COVID or they need a diagnosis. So for example, the employee is getting tested for COVID. The amount of leave depends on the size of the employer and the net income. Here's a chart of that. And I also just want to mention that there's other benefits that may be available. There's disability benefits if an employee contracted COVID outside of work. There's potential workers' comp benefits if they contracted it in the workplace.
Yeah, so one thing I know, Marissa, you mentioned boosters earlier. I do want to say, because this is very difficult to predict, the world of COVID and employer-employee relationships and laws, et cetera. It is not inconceivable that within the next couple of months, everyone is eligible for boosters. And so then the question becomes, can you mandate boosters? What does that mean? That's certainly possible. I don't know that the law would be any different than what we described, but I think it comes under the non-legal aspect of will there be a certain segment of your population that thinks without the booster, it's not safe in the workplace. As you know, I haven't read a lot of statistics on, you know, we'll talk about Pfizer where you have a booster, but you know, what is the efficacy as you're in month 6, 7, 8? It's a little unclear. There's not enough data on that. That's at least out there in the public. So that's something to just keep an eye on. You know, I could see, you know, there are some medical experts giving warnings about, you know, the cold weather coming and then possibility of another surge, and where, you know, the eligibility for boosters comes into play. Just something else that could be coming down the pike.
We have a question here, a comment. We have a part-time employee who also works elsewhere. Which employer is obligated to provide the 5 to 14 days per calendar leave per calendar year?
You're saying, oh, someone has a
Part-time employee who also works elsewhere. So which employer is obligated to provide the 5 to 14 days of leave per calendar year? Or does it not apply to part-time workers?
No, it still applies to part-time workers. I think if we're talking about COVID leave in particular, it's when someone's not coming into work. So it's not like you're granting, you know, 5 days for an employee. If someone was scheduled to work that day and they're absent because they have COVID and they're subject to an order of quarantine or isolation, then for that day, you would provide the leave.
So I think that's all that we had as part of the substantive part of the program. Obviously, we're happy to answer questions. If anyone comes up with questions related or unrelated for that matter, you have our email addresses. We'd be happy to answer them and answer any questions now if anybody has. But otherwise, I just want to say thank you again to Roger and Brian in particular for having us. Thank you.
Absolutely. So everyone here who asked about the recording, yes, that we are recording. We're going to share the recording with everyone when we sort of reach out to do our thank you email, and I will include and CC Andrew and Marissa on that so that you can reach out to them separately with any questions that you have. One announcement, and you can share this with your colleagues. We're going to be starting a sort of a smaller gathering, an HR roundtable session for people in transition. So if you are on the call and you're in transition yourself, or you have friends or colleagues who are in transition, we are putting together a group with that's going to have special presentations, special content for people who are in that what is the full-time job of getting ourselves reattached to a new opportunity or new employer. So be on the lookout for that. We're going to send that out. I think we have one question here in the chat window. Questions about New York City sick leave, which employer has to pay? I think that's maybe the same as the last question.
I think so.
All right, so we're just getting a bunch of thank yous here. Thank you all. Wonderful having you. If any of you did not receive your HR roundtable invite directly, perhaps someone sent it to you, and you would like to be on our distribution list for further programs, you can email me at roliver@temppositions.com, and Tempositions is all one word with one P, roliver@temppositions.com, and I will make sure that you are added to our distribution list. Any more questions here in the thing? Nope, I think we are good to go. Just thank yous chiming in. We love that. We appreciate that. And thank you to you all. Marissa, Andrew, tremendous. And we look forward to having you back to speak on other topics in the near future. Thanks very much. And there you go, Walter, take us out. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.